Hello, good evening. For those in the Southeast Asia, this is Tom Dreesen, and I'm going to be moderating this session with the three expert speakers that we have. The title of our session is Measuring Energy Efficiency Results. We're going to focus on international best practices and examples, and I'm going to start by giving a brief overview of the three speakers, myself being one of them, so I'll probably be brief on my own, but we have Alfredo Baño, he's an evaluation specialist at the Independent Evaluation Department of ADB, Asia Development Bank, where he evaluates projects, programs, and policies in the energy sector. He has 18 years of experience working on energy infrastructure sectors in Europe and Asia. Before joining ADB, he worked for the International Atomic Energy Agency, where he consulted for the World Bank and ADB in energy sector operations, and also worked on energy consulting for an energy consulting firm in Spain. He's an electromechanical engineer with majors in electricity generation and power system, holds an MBA in corporate finance from the IE Business School. So we're really happy to have him on board and especially focused on the evaluation piece of energy efficiency. The next we have Mark Lister, who's the managing partner of Asia Clean Energy Partners. It's an international consulting and advisory firm. He's in Melbourne, Australia. He's a leading advocate of expanded energy efficiency deployment. He has 20 years of experience. I've known Mark a long time. He's been active. He's lectured in postgraduate energy courses. He worked a while at ADB in the Philippines to facilitate and scale up climate technologies in Asia Pacific. Then he went over to Denmark for a while at the Copenhagen Center and did some nice work there on energy efficiency, and for those of you that don't know, the Copenhagen Center is the global hub of sustainable energy for all, and it aims to double the rate of energy efficiency improvements by 2030. He just recently became the chair of EVO, Efficiency Evaluation Organization, which we're so happy about. In January 2020, jumping to me quickly, I've been on the EVO board for like 15 years. Was a past chair. I've been active on it for quite some time, and my background is I'm really an old energy efficiency warrior, I'd have to say, but my background is mostly in ESCO, energy service companies, in energy efficiency over 35 years. I've had ESCOs in 10 countries. I lived in Indonesia since 2012, but I've been prior to that was in China, so I've been doing lots of work, capacity building to hundreds of consultants, ESCOs, and bankers. I do a lot of consulting work now for Asia Development Bank, and just recently has started this past year working for the low carbon energy program under the UK Prosperity Fund, working in 4 countries and includes Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and Vietnam. And I'm doing a lot of work to scale up energy efficiency, focusing on some of the main barriers in almost all those markets. And one of the things I'm focused on is opening up the government market for ESCOs, and they have the common barriers in all 3 countries, and I'm working on that. So again, I was past chair of EVO, was on the board of the Alliance to Save Energy for like 14 years. So looking forward to this session. Really appreciate everybody joining us. So I guess I'm going to start right off with Alfredo. You want to jump in and do the first presentation?
Hi, Tom. Thanks a lot for the introduction. This is Alfredo Baño. As Tom mentioned, I'm working at ADB at the Evaluation Department, working basically in energy sector evaluation. I'm going to kickstart these presentations talking a little bit more general, what the benefits and challenges of energy efficiency projects in the region, and try to lead the discussion towards the next presentation, which is in monitoring and verification of energy efficiency project results. So let's start, so we have more time later for a good Q&A session. Okay. So, well, very quickly, my presentation has 5 main parts. I'm going to start talking about how is energy efficiency doing in Asia. Obviously, what are the benefits? For those that are not energy efficiency specialists, you might be surprised of some of the things that energy efficiency brings to the table that are not right away visible. We'll discuss as well challenges and barriers, why energy efficiency is not growing as fast as it should. And then bring some concrete examples. We'll talk about what means measuring energy efficiency results and why it's so needed to have solid monitoring and verification systems. So let's start first slide is an introduction why energy efficiency is important. Well, it's the first fuel and it's the cheapest source of energy. Basically, it's obviously not a source of energy, but for a system with energy supply, if you're able to cut down consumption, if you're able to cut down load, that is the best way of having more for the same amount of energy we're consuming. That's the cheapest way of doing it. Obviously, if you consume less,
Alfredo, sorry to interrupt you, but your slides aren't moving on. Just want to let you know.
not moving. Sorry.
No, it's still on the front slide, right?
Well,
Well,
not sure how to make it move. Maybe it's because I don't have rights now, or what? Oh, I know why. Okay, now it's moving, right?
yes.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Sorry,
Now we got it. It's working. Yes, you got it.
So these are the 5 parts of the presentation that I discussed before, and luckily I was still at the first slide. So here we go. Cheapest source of energy, energy efficiency operations produce more services using energy with the same consumption. No CO2 emissions, obviously, no air water pollution, no resettlement, all those things that are linked to some sources of energy, particularly fossil fuels, do not have an effect here. Again, system-wise is the best investment because it has the highest economic internal rate of return for the society, as well as the highest financial internal rate of return for whoever is implementing these systems. This happens only, obviously, if the tariff regulation is right, meaning if the tariff basically pays for whatever a company, usually a public, a state-owned power utility invests and operates, and it's just a cost-plus basis, then obviously there is not such a benefit of cutting, reducing energy production. But in this sense, the idea is that you get more for the same. Now, how are we doing in Asia with energy efficiency? What we have been seeing in the past 20 years in Asia is that there is a huge potential, but there are a few things that are being happening. Most of the energy efficiency interventions are being done on the supply side of the business. A lot of loss reduction in power systems, a lot of investments in more efficient power generation, moving more into combined cycles from open cycle gas turbines, for example, or converting the more inefficient subcritical to advanced coal power generation technologies. That is happening at a larger scale in Asia. What is not really happening is the demand side of the business. Thermal insulation is quite absent as compared with other regions, more in developed countries, particularly Europe and the US. Electrical appliances are not that efficient, particularly air conditioning. Cooling is going to be, is expected to be one of the highest consumers of electricity in the next decades. IEA was estimating that 50% or almost 50% of electricity consumption would go to power residential air conditioning. That's a big amount of energy that we are using in air cons that are not efficient, and that we can save a lot of power generation. Efficient transport modes as well, efficient cars, maybe e-mobility that use less energy per kilometer driven, and all those things. I wanted to show this graph, which shows as measured by the SC for all. They have the tracking SDG 7, the Sustainable Development Goal number 7 on energy. One of the indicators is energy intensity. And there's basically to show that from year 2000 to year 2015, out of 32 development member countries, these are the countries that work with ADB. You know, since we started in 2000, some have gone down, others have gone flat, a few have gone a little bit up. There is plenty of work still to be done in this business. We are very far from achieving the 2030 development objectives of the SDGs in energy efficiency. So we definitely need to start working in this direction. Before moving on, please note that this is an energy intensity graph. is not an energy efficiency graph. Main reasons are it's impossible to aggregate all energy efficiency interventions into one measure. The energy intensity is an indirect measure, measuring full consumption or full primary energy by GDP. So it's a very inaccurate, well, not so, I mean, not very maybe, but quite inaccurate to measure energy efficiency looking at intensity only, mostly because when switching sectors, for example, from industry to services, there is a change in how energy is consumed, and that structural change changes intensity, but not necessarily changes efficiency. Okay, let's move on. So let's talk a little bit about benefits. We have I have here 2 slides on benefits. The first one talks basically about macroeconomic public finance benefits and the society well-being. As you can see here, I'm going to go fast over this. The increased overall country's productivity, it's a direct benefit of energy efficiency operations because you are not wasting energy. So you're reducing your operating costs. It reduces your exposure to volatility of oil prices, of gas prices, particularly when there are economic crises like 2010 or now, how the prices spike up and down. Basically, if you are reducing your consumption of those fuels, you're reducing your exposure. McKinsey recently published in their website some reports where they say that the estimation is 7.7 direct jobs would be created for each $1 million of investment in energy efficiency. That's a lot of jobs, and that is almost a little bit higher than renewable energies, which is, I think, 7.3, but more than double the jobs are being created by fossil fuel energy interventions. Regarding public finance, governments, municipalities are going to spend less money in public energy services like street lighting. They will also increase their tax revenues because companies are going to be reducing their operational expenditures. They're going to have higher profits. They're going to pay more taxes on that. Regarding the society well-being, benefits are very clear. If we consume less energy, we're going to have a positive impact on health because we are going to pollute less, less air pollution. We're going to have better insulation, which our heating and cooling systems are going to work better. Also, positive impact on climate change and the associated knock-on effects on the planet all across the supply chain. There is also benefits regarding economic productivity. Companies will reduce their operational costs, as mentioned, improve their margins, but they will also improve operations and their value added, because it's not that they're going to consume less energy, it's that their systems are going to improve, they're going to be more profitable, their production and quality are going to increase, as well as the working environment is going to be better. Finally, regarding energy delivery, and this is more tailored perhaps to power utilities, they're going to have reduced losses for generation and T&D, which is going to improve system reliability. They're going to reduce the price volatility. They're going to be delayed expansion of more power plants or more transformers because the demand is not going to grow so fast, or at least the installed infrastructure is going to be able to cope with the demand. As well, they're going to reduce tariffs because with more efficiency, the system is going to be more efficient. They will be able to reduce the tariffs, which is going to improve affordability, and eventually consumers are going to default less and have less arrears and payments. However, all these benefits are not being properly measured. That's one of the issues that we have with energy efficiency. As an example, what are the benefits of, for example, a DSM energy efficiency project? It's not only that we're going to reduce consumption, but if it's an electricity project, we're going to be reducing the load at the evening peak. We're going to reduce those losses. The feeders are going to be less overloaded. They're going to reduce the ramping requirements for the baseload generation, less damage, less higher consumption because of that acceleration in the system. We're going to reduce or even avoid having so many pickers. They are, by definition, much more expensive because of they're only working a couple of hours a day. And that is going to also reduce air pollution because fossil fuel generation is not going to be used as much. Greenhouse gas emissions are going to be reduced as well. And overall, the energy bills for consumers are going to be ultimately reduced. So it's all a win-win situation. That was the good. Now we're going to move into the not so good. What are the barriers that we have here? We have a few structure first in financial. Some financial barriers are that people and companies tend to look more at the upfront costs rather than the total lifetime cost of their energy system. It's going to cost me a lot of money today, but I'm going to save it over 10 years. That's not really a good proposition for me. I prefer to pay a bit more and be less efficient, but every month, prefer to pay a little bit more every month. That's a lot more today, or get along to do that. There are also capital constraints in companies, and efficiency is not a priority, but the priority is actually obviously running business, increasing production, changing products, whatever, but energy efficiency is not usually at the top. And again, the short-term horizons are important. If paybacks are over 2.5 to 3 years, I would say 99% of the companies would not invest in energy efficiency because it takes too long to recover that cost, and companies are not really interested into that. Regarding operational, there is also a change aversion. Replacing equipment, it's usually more interesting than changing fully the system and having to retrain your staff and having to get used to new specifications, which links as well with locked-in inventories of spare parts or equipment that do not fit what you had before. So changing a new machine which is more efficient, it brings a lot of different issues to your operation that most of companies are reluctant to do. There are also regulatory challenges. On the utility side, many utilities, state-owned, are usually paid on a cost-plus basis. So there is no really any incentive for them to save energy because whatever they cost, they are paid that plus a margin, and that is flat. So it's not really that is going to influence them much. For consumers and for companies, some energy efficiency programs there are around are quite cumbersome to sign in, plenty of requirements and procedures that are unclear. Again, this is not part of the core business of the company, so not really interesting. Energy efficiency is not usually considered as part of the overall national integrated energy planning systems and processes. So it comes later when the traditional power supply or energy supply system was already in place. So it's more a patch or a add-on rather than is part of the integration of the initial thinking. And many places still don't have standards for energy efficiency, how to measure and how to implement those. Finally, there are knowledge and capacity barriers. These are huge, very, very limited awareness of energy and non-energy benefits of energy efficiency at all different levels, even energy practitioners. In-house capacity in companies, consumers, they don't really have the technical expertise. They have to hire people from outside. Again, this is not part of their core business. This is not really interesting. And because we are talking about measuring and verifying those savings, there is no really capacity. People don't really know how to properly measure this and don't have the right tools, which increases obviously the risk perception when you have to invest in the savings. From two sources, one is the US Department of Energy. A very interesting sentence they reported is that absence of a standard measurement and verification procedures can negatively impact demand response, contract settlement, operational planning, long-term resource planning, etc. Very important measurement and verification procedures in place to get to all these things and become an efficient system. Interestingly, the National University of Singapore carried out a survey among a number of companies. 39% of them reported, that had energy projects reported that they are not able to report energy savings with quantitative figures. Basically, they don't really know how much energy they're saving after implementing the project. And that's something to think about. Now, energy efficiency seems simple. If we take incandescent 60-watt bulb and we change it for a 12-watt LED, it's clear we have an 80% savings. Well, that's what it says on the box, but sometimes, or I would say most of the times, that's not what is really happening. The rated power is not the actual power. Somebody has to measure it. Tom will explain later what are the big differences when you only look at the nameplate rather than measuring it properly. Of course, you also can have a more complex system. For example, a project that aims at reducing energy consumption in a building with 4 options: lighting systems, thermal insulation, air conditioning units, water heating. You want to improve all that, but you don't know which one has a better cost benefit ratio, which one is going to have a more impact for the same money. So you have to measure it. So, but how to measure thermal insulation losses? How much does it cost? How both relates? How much dollars at the end of the day we are going to save on each of the interventions, and how to prioritize them? That's the trick of the question, and that's why M&V is so important. Another example is ESCO model and energy performance contract model, where an ESCO borrows from a bank money to implement an energy efficiency project at a client facility. The payment from the client is based on the energy savings, and the loan is based on the energy savings. However, those energy savings have to be measured. We don't know whether they are accurate, and we still don't know who is going to measure it. The ESCO cannot measure it, obviously, because of conflict of interest, but the client cannot either, and the bank don't know how. So somebody has to come there and measure it. We're going to see later who. So it's clear that we need a monitoring and verification system, trusted third party that is able to certify accurately the energy savings. We need audit protocols, which are standardized or generally accepted by the parties. And we need independent auditors, independent agents that do not have conflict of interests, but still have enough capacity to do the job properly. So to ensure that, it's very important to have increased M&V capacity and certification programs in countries in order to scale up energy efficiency interventions. And hope that after this event today, those working in governments, those working at planning agencies are able to go back home and think that really this is something very important for any developing country to push up for the M&V. To finalize, Lord Kelvin said that if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. Well, this is about measuring properly energy efficiency in order to improve it. So good luck with that. If you guys have any question or you want to follow up on anything discussed, please, this is my email. Feel free to drop me any line anytime. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alfredo. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Appreciate you linking it in. I noticed, and you mentioned the capacity problems and everything, and I've been working here a long time, and clearly what I see, the big, there's plenty of funds out there, as we've said, but there's no pipeline of projects, and that's due to 2 things. One is the M&V, and the other is an ability for the market to develop what we call bankable investment grade audits. There's just a complete lack of understanding how to do that. Many of them, they do energy audits, but they don't break the energy audits down into discrete, implementable energy savings measures. So yeah, big job still, but it's been that way for a long time. But the awareness is becoming greater on at least what the gaps are, in my opinion.
Hope so. And now that you have to basically implement it and make it happen, right?
Right.
To those measurements and to start disaggregating and knowing what we're measuring.
Right. Is my screen showing, by the way?
Let me pass to you.
I think I did it already. I think I'm in, right? Can you see it?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, great. So to be very frank with you, we wanted to make this used to be called a deep dive session. It's now the side events, but we're sticking with the deep dive, and mine's really a pretty deep dive. So for those of you that are want to stay at 50,000 feet, you may want to go get a cup of coffee or something, because we're going to dive deep on this one, on the best practices for project public street lighting M&V example. And it's exactly what Alfredo was saying. It seems so simple. You go from 20 watts to 8, you save 40%, whatever, big number, 80%, 60%, 70%, 80%, whatever, big numbers. but it's not that simple. And that's what we've seen. I've been doing a lot of work on public street lighting. I did 2 pilot projects here in Indonesia. I've looked at several other in Malaysia and looking at several others now in other countries. And I see pretty common barriers. And the thing is that most of them are done by municipalities who really do not have the capacity at all to do the street lighting, what's required to make sure that they get the proper benefits that they're expecting to get. Because what I find is most municipalities do need those savings. They need to realize those savings to pay the whatever, it's an ESCO or whatever it is, whether it's a bank, whatever. They need those savings. They don't have a lot of excess funding. So I'm gonna go through this and it's a case study, but it's got a lot of reality to it. I can't mention any names, so I'm just going to say this is not too far from reality. What I'm going to go through today, it may shock you when you see what I'm going through. So, so my screen's playing with me. It's not moving. Here we go. Locked up. Okay. So I'm going to go through some of the high-level items about M&V that many of you know, or many of you may not. So. And this is part of the EVO program, and you know, M&V is the meter of an energy efficiency project. You know, we've got a position paper out there, EVO does, on deemed savings, and many of the financiers are trying to eliminate measuring and verifying savings because it's too complicated. But the reality is, it's required to calculate the achieved energy savings that with any degree of reliability. If you don't do that, you're kind of guessing more or less. You can estimate and come close in some cases, but you never know if you are or not. Energy savings are unique because it comes from the absence of energy use. It's not, you can't measure it. You don't measure savings with a meter like kilowatt hours. You determine it by comparing the before. You measure the energy use before and after the project is implemented, and that becomes a reasonable estimate of what the savings are. But there is no exact number. That it's not an exact number, and you can make that number as accurate as you want, but with it has high M&V costs. Okay, I don't know why it's sticking. So the most important thing, and you're going to hear about this, and this is related very much to the IPMVP, is that the baseline, energy baseline, is critical. It's the critical component of measurement and verification because it reflects the core usage, but it's not just energy usage, it's also the related equipment facility data from which savings are measured and calculated, and from which future adjustments are made. And it can be affected by many variables, and that's why there's several options. I'm going to just go over very high level with you about the IPMVP. But here's the thing, it must be developed before the project is implemented, and it must come from actual existing data. It cannot be developed reliably with any reliable accuracy after the project is implemented. And I've heard this several times from several utilities in many countries that the utilities say, well, we'll go in and we'll do the M&V afterwards. It's easy. Well, no, it's not. You've already removed the inefficient technologies. So and therein lies one of the major critical things to IPMVP is the fact that there is a measurement, some form of measurement before and after. And these are the 2 basic methods for IPMVP, which basically have become what I consider to be the generally accepted M&V principles on a global basis for measurement and verification of energy efficiency projects. And the 2 methods are retrofit isolation and then the whole facility. And I'm going to go into the 2 options, but under the retrofit isolation, you basically isolate literally the retrofit from the rest of the building. So you remove all variables, and it becomes the measures is only retrofit. The measures, you only measure the retrofit effect only. So it stays within the boundary of the project. And it often uses a utility meter for option B. And the good news about this, adjustments can be simple. Under the whole facility method, it measures all effects in the facility. Retrofits and other changes are all included, intended and unintended, and which makes those adjustments very complex. And some of you have heard me speak will say I rarely use the whole facility method because of that. The adjustments can be quite complex, and there's many variables introduced that into your project savings that have to be identified. These are the 4 options. 2 of them, A and B, are the retrofit isolation, and then the whole building are C and D. I'm not going to spend much time going through these options. That's a separate presentation in and of itself. But the retrofit option A is the one that is predominantly the one I'm going to illustrate for the street lighting. And what it does is you still have measured performance. You do measured performance, but then you have stipulated operations. So there's pieces of it that you can stipulate, not measure all the time. Option V still isolates the retrofit and it measures performance on an ongoing basis. The whole facility is typically on the whole building. Option C is where you basically look at the whole utility bill. And then the option D is the calibrated simulation tool, which is very extensive, and you basically build a model, a simulation model that mimics what the existing operating parameters and all the energy consumption is. And then you can make adjustments with it. It's calibrated, very sophisticated, relatively expensive, and has its applications when it makes sense, but I've only used it once in my 35 years. So I'm going to go through them. This is how the option A that's typically used for public street lighting. And basically, as Alfredo said, we have two types of baselines that I call. You have a rated baseline and a measured baseline. The rated baseline is where you just take the rated kilowatt hour, but you have to you physically count your fixtures, and you create it by category, and then you just take the kW per lamp times the number of lamps. And so the baseline then becomes you have to identify the stipulated hours, and that can be determined in many ways. And we've done in the hospital I did, and street lighting, you can do street lighting is easier actually, but in facilities you can put in these low cost meters and just run them for a week and see what the hours are, and then kind of group your fixtures by operating hours so that you can stipulate it. Then the rated kWh baseline equals the rated kW, which is the demand up in the fixed demand times the stipulated hours. That gives you the rated kWh baseline. And then a big potential savings item, not potential, a big realized savings item for LED retrofits is the lamp replacement cost. And you can get that data by looking at past invoices and determine how many hours the lamps work normally or stay in operation. You can look on the, not necessarily on a historical basis, but you can look even on the packaging or on the label or even on the nameplate and see how many rated hours there are. And you can then stipulate a replacement cost. That's typically what's done. So then you get to the measured baseline, and it's on the actual lighting that's retrofitted when you do the measurements. You can do some measured baseline before, and I'll talk about that later. Normally it's not done. You can just take the actual rated, that's like if it's a 70 watt fixture, 50, but I'll show you the examples on that. But during the retrofit, you perform actual measurements of the before and after kW on statistically reliable number of lamps for each category. And so that's typically what you do. You have an actual measurement though, before and after of the kW. Then you take that baseline, it equals the before kW measurements. That's what your measured kW baseline becomes. And then the measured kWh baseline is just taking that kW baseline times the stipulated hours. Pretty simple. It follows the rated one, except that you're using measured data instead of just what the lamp says, 70 watt or whatever it is, 150 watt. The rating savings estimate from the LED retrofit. I mean, you estimate you have to estimate the kW for each LED lamp retrofit that you're going to make. For instance, if it's a 100 watt lamp, you may say, well, we're going to install a 50 watt LED. If it's like a 100 watt high pressure sodium, we're going to replace it with a 50 watt. And so you have to make some assumptions there and estimate what that kW is, multiply it times the number of lamps for that respective kW, and then you just subtract that from the rated kW baseline. That gives you the reduction, the kW reduction that you're going to get on a rated basis again. Then you multiply that times the stipulated hours, and that gives you the rated reduction. And then the electric savings, it can be, in many cases, in some utilities, they have a demand charge, and others they don't, but you can do the rated kW, and it could be the rated kWh as well, and kW, and put that into the current utility rate to arrive at the electric savings, the monetary savings. And then you can get the total rated savings would be your rated electric savings plus the stipulated maintenance savings. That would give you the total project savings based on rated savings, not measured savings. Then basically you do the same thing, that same process up above for the measured, except you use after kW measurements. That's it. You do the kW, you multiply it times the stipulated hours, and then you get your actual savings by taking the measured electric savings and add the stipulated maintenance savings. So that's how it's typically done. And the stipulated factors, there's two stipulated items here. One is the operating hours. And that goes up, I'll go back here. That's here and under B. You do that during the baseline. You determine what's the representative annual operating hours. And you can do that in multiple ways, whatever you feel is the best way to represent what the current operating hours are for the lighting. And so you'll see, I'll go to my example. Now, so I'm trying to, hold on, lost my little thing, where'd it go? Here it is, I got it, okay. So what this shows is, this is an example specifically of a municipality that has 16,500 lamps right now. And you can see it's broken down. 10,000 of the lamps are at 70 watt, 2,000 at 100, you can see 3,000 at 150, right? And so the rate is just simply taking the KW times the number of fixture and divide it by 1,000. That's the KW, all right? So you take the 70 times 10,000 divided by 1,000. That gives you the rated KW. That's the baseline, 1,800 KW. Then you determine the stipulated hours, and typically street lighting is around 12 hours. And then you just get the rated by multiplying the kilowatt hours times that stipulated. That gives you the rated baseline, and then you times the rate, gives you the electricity baseline, and then you've got the lamp replacement cost of 362. So if you add those together, it's around $1.1 million in terms of what the baseline is. Now here, this is where the interesting part comes in, the measured baseline. So this is what I've seen in some cases. You'll see these 70 watt ones. I broke them into two categories, and I'll explain that in a minute. But when we do measurements, we find a lot of cases the measurement's less. So what you can see is that the rated 70 only was measured at 54, 63, 100, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason that I broke this into two categories. You see, I've got 3,000 and 7,000. That makes up this 10,000 baseline, is because you'll see in the baseline, many of these fixtures, the lighting's not sufficient at all. So you can't really retrofit it. You can't retrofit it. You have to retrofit it differently. There's some streets like small residentials that do not require many lumens of lighting, but others are. And we found in some municipalities, they put 70 watt, these are high pressure sodium, of course, 70 watt fixture, and they don't provide enough light. So you have to categorize those into those that have different requirements of lumens. And that's why I broke these out. So of these, and you'll see later that 3,000 of them have a, well, you have to look at the next slide, but 3,000 of these can be retrofitted normally, but then the bulk of them cannot be. So these are maybe small residential. 3,000 are in small residentials. They don't require a lot of lighting. 7,000 require a lot of lighting. And again, you multiply the KW times that, and what you'll see is that there's a reduction. When you do this, you'll see that when you do the measurement, you'll see that there's 90,000 less. We've got the baseline of 788,000 is what it is, and it's actually gone down to 90,000 because of the measured rates. So we've got 90,000 less baseline than what we thought after we measured it. After we did the baseline, we have 90,000 less dollars in baseline than we thought. And that means you're going to get less savings, is what that means. And that's because you got all these reduced. You got 207 less kilowatt baseline hours, or kilowatt. Okay, multiply that times the 4380, you get 906, and then so you have 90,000 less baseline than you thought you had by doing the measurement. So that's the difference between the rated and the measured. All right. My screen is stuck. Bear with me. Okay. All right. So this is the actual savings. This is an extension on the spreadsheet. And what you'll see is on the rated basis, this is an estimate that was done on the rated, and you can see what we did. We said all these the rated was 70 watts. We're going to replace it. This is actually rated with 35 watts. All right. So this assumes this is what the original estimate was. We're just going to do it with 35. You're going to basically reduce them by 50%. See this category? All of them are 50%. So basically, you're going to save $394,000. All right. However, when you do the actual measurements, you'll see down below we only can do 35 watt on these, on like the 3000 I was talking about. I'm sorry that fixtures, that's the number's missing, but that's the 3000 fixtures. Then on the others, we have to leave it, we have to actually increase it. So what that does is it actually increases significantly. You end up having to have more electricity consumption for like 7,000 of your fixtures. The 70 watt fixtures represented like 60% of your lamps, and of that, roughly half of those, or half of all of your fixtures, you have to increase your consumption. And this is based on a real case situation. We realized that when we were out doing the studies, we talked to clients and to the customers, the residentials, they said there wasn't enough lighting. So in many areas we saw that. So basically, yeah, we have to increase the lighting. So what we end up doing is we originally thought we'd get 394 of savings. We're going to get 170. We're going to get 220,000 less savings, 56% of it less than what we thought. And when you add the maintenance savings in, then you get the 4.2 million versus the 5, or you get the 5.5. That's the CapEx too. CapEx is 4.2. We thought it would be, ends up being 5.5. So now you end up having additional CapEx of almost 1.3 million. So the payback goes from what we thought, 5.7 years to 10.4. Big negative, big negative. And we see that. And I'm going to go into a summary of what caused all these problems. But of the 220, you got 130 out of it is due to the reduced savings from having to increase the wattage for the 70 watt fixtures, and the other 90,000, as you may recall, is from having a lower measured demand from a lower baseline. That's where you get the 220. It's comprised of the 130 and the 90 from the previous slide. All right. So this is a summary of what I just went over. So you've got, but what this really illustrates, it's even like amazing. This is not too far from reality, where a municipality announced that they were going to save $700,000 from an LED retrofit, and they did that based on, and this is similar to the model we have here. I'm using this model, and it's similar to these numbers that they said that we're spending 14 million kilowatt hours. They've got it from the utility bills. All right, so they're at 10 cents, and then their estimated savings is 50% of that. That should be 1.4 million, not 1.2 million up above. Sorry about that, but it should be 14 million, 1.4 million. 50% of that is 700,000, and so. But then what you noticed is, so they were planning to save 700,000 based on a 50% reduction in the utility bill. However, when you go, that 173 is from the previous slide. If you go back to the previous slide, that's all right here. This number right here, this is all we're going to achieve is the 173 right here, right there, the 173. So you can see it's significantly less. Sorry, I'm having problems with whenever I put this spotter on it, it won't change, the slide won't change. So anyway, so what we've got is a reduction, we've got a shortfall, $527,000, which is 75% less. And so what's causing that? The predominant reason is that they did the KW on action. They didn't do it on actual lamps. They were not reconciled to the utility payments. See, the baseline was only 7.9 million right here. If you go back to the previous slide, I'm not going to do that because it's too hard to get back to, but the actual kilowatt hours was 7.9 million when you did the rated kilowatt hours, and they thought it was 14 million is what they're paying. So 305,000 is because they're paying the utility, either the inventory's wrong or they're paying, something else is going on. They've got people stealing power, which happens in some countries. We don't know. We're in the process of trying to figure that out. But the bottom line is, of that, 300,000 is because they based the savings, they didn't reconcile the actual lamps to the utility bill. And then these other two are the ones I already said. You got 90,000 on the no baseline KW measurements were made. So this is the difference between the rated and the actual kilowatt hours. And then you got the 70 watt lamps providing little or no savings, actually increasing. You have to increase the electric consumption. So this is a pretty, I think, may seem bizarre example of how could you be that far off by just simply saying, we're going to save 50% of our lighting. It seems like that's a simple thing, but I think the real benefit of this, what I'm trying to illustrate to everybody is these lessons learned. I mean, you have to estimate savings from accurate physical inventory of the current streetlights. You can't do it off the utility bills. And if there will be a difference, it's okay to have a minor difference, but not 40, 50% or 30, even for 30%. So you need to reconcile that to the rated KW to the paid utility invoices. It's absolutely critical. The second thing is you must measure some different categories that you can. In other words, if we were going to do it, I would measure different categories. Like I would measure the 70 watts, the 130s, the 100 watts. I would do some form of measure it and have that before I waited to get the bids in, because I think that just could help reduce that 90K variance on the difference between measured and rated. I would recommend that. It's not that difficult to do. Get local contractors to provide cost estimates so you don't have such a variance like we saw on the actual cost. And by the way, part of that cost is caused by well, I'm trying to think how to say it tactfully, but reality is vendors trying to sell benefits that are not needed. You know, the big thing is to have smart meters and all this stuff for the street lighting. And while they're helpful, if you're not going to use them to actually reduce the energy consumption, it's going to drive up your payback significantly. When we did the two street lightings pilot projects we did in Indonesia, we had one that had the smart meters, one that did not, and the payback was almost twice as long on the smart ones. And again, if you can't justify the savings, you have to really think about that. It's going to drive up the payback significantly. And that's probably what's happened on the cost estimate we saw. I think they started buying a lot more features than what they could use. So it's okay to buy those if you have the staff to use them. And this last one is what we've experienced here in Indonesia. And it was a lessons learned from our pilot project. You have to ensure that the reduced electricity usage from the retrofit will be reflected in future utility bills, which is not always the case, especially in Southeast Asia. Many utilities do fixed billing. So even though you reduce the kilowatt hours, the municipality is not going to realize those savings. And the next thing is you should install new meters where none exist, and where possible, and we're really trying to is to really convert old meters to ones that provide open access data. Really, those are critical things, I believe, that you need to understand. You can't just assume because you do the retrofit that the savings is going to be realized. And part of that is you have to work with the utility and really understand how they're billing. And when we did our pilot retrofits here, we found out that we did the KW reduction. We measured it before and after, and it was not realized in several of the bills. And the way street lighting is, they'll have one meter for anywhere from 10 to 15 different poles. And so we did each one on meters when we did our pilots, and on several of them, the savings were not passed through from the utility for a variety of reasons. So that's the end of my presentation. Mark, do you want to jump in now and take over? You want me to send it to you?
It's okay, Tom. I can go ahead from here. Thanks very much.
Yep.
And hello to everybody. I'm just wanted to let you know also that we're not displaying our video, our faces today, just in an effort to preserve a bit of bandwidth to make sure that everybody has a clear signal from what we're doing. And I'm really following directly on from Tom in this presentation. I hope my screen is displaying okay there. Just let me start up the
yeah, we
the
can
full
see
screen.
it.
You can see it okay? All right.
Yes. Not the full screen yet, it's coming, right.
Okay. Well, that's just because I've got to, sorry, I need to fix something here on display. I don't know why it does this, but it's going to two screens. Let me just fix that. Okay. It should now be okay. So, my role as chair of the Efficiency Valuation Organization is really to extend from what Alfredo and Tom have just shared with us. Tom had some real detail there about a project, and it's a good demonstration of why the expected savings from a project don't always match with the reality, because there needs to be a serious effort and some expertise put towards measurement of the baseline and then measurement of savings afterwards. So I want to tell you a little bit about EVO a little bit about what we're doing as an organisation to try and help people to understand this and to potentially bridge the gap with some new training and some new certification for people to actually get the skills that they need and grow the energy efficiency market. So a little bit of background about the efficiency valuation organisation. It's a small organisation behind the scenes, but it has a fairly wide spread acknowledgement among energy efficiency practitioners. It's the author and owner of the International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol, leading on from what Tom said, the IPMVP as it's known. This is something developed a long time ago, and it really is the world authority on these issues of measurement and verification, setting out the core concepts of the M&V topic and having pretty definitive views about how this needs to be done and done properly. So as the slide says, it's long-standing, it's globally recognized, and it sets out the generally accepted principles. EVO really is an authority on this topic globally. It has a large community of practitioners, both those who've been trained in these principles, but also those who are interested to know more about it and looking at how to implement energy efficiency in their countries. EVO runs a range of training at the moment in conjunction with its training partners, where we have training partners in over 20 countries in all parts of the world. We have the IPMVP translated into all the major languages, and courses are run on M&V, but also on other questions around finance, standards, looking at things like the conduct of audits and the understanding of statistics and other courses like that. And we continue even in this period with the COVID-19 pandemic to see great uptake from our training partners in running courses online and continuing to help people get certified as M&V professionals. So the mission, as you can see there, is really specific to M&V and making sure that we can get energy efficiency projects understood, measured in terms of its impact and savings, because ultimately that underpins confidence in energy efficiency, and that underpins scale up and further investment. So to recap a little bit of what Tom had also said, monitoring and verification, it really is the meter of energy efficiency projects, and if you can compare it to a renewable energy installation, of course that is much more straightforward, where you're looking at the amount of energy generated, it's metered in terms of its output, and that's easily measured and quantified. Some of the things that Tom ran through demonstrated that it's not quite so easy in relation to energy efficiency, and Alfredo as well, mentioning that there's a lot of complicating factors here just around understanding the baseline, what would have happened without an energy efficiency project, and then understanding the impact of that project, complicated by a number of factors, including some of the things mentioned, like climate, the actual use of the site, which can change, even the way that that retrofitting is done and the installation and commissioning of new equipment is very, very important, because we've seen so many cases where energy efficient equipment is installed, but it's not installed right, or it's not actually commissioned properly, and it's not functioning to its full potential. So the expected savings don't match the reality, similar to what Tom was saying. So it's not just about understanding the quality of a product and the energy saving potential of a product. It's about understanding it in its context, and that's a lot of what Tom was talking about. So it is unique. It's about measuring before and after, and it's about basically understanding the centrality of measurement to the whole process here. There was a question I saw come up on the question slides there about deemed savings and some organisations that rely on deemed savings as an M&V measure. By its very nature, deemed savings is not measurement. It's actually deciding without measuring what the savings will be. So that's intrinsically limited if you take the approach that we've just been talking about as being important. So having measurements are key. There is a role for deemed savings in a programmatic sense, where you have a whole lot of very small savings which need to be aggregated together. So there is a role for that in actually making understanding what a baseline could be across an entire program. But it's no substitute for full measurement, and to say that it is actually sort of missing the point a little bit, and potentially opening up to criticism and opening up to a lack of confidence in the savings that are achieved, ultimately then meaning there's a lack of confidence for investors and supporters to go further in supporting your project. So we understand the role for deemed savings, but we also think that there's, because measurement actually does regularly show differences to what expectations are, that they need to be treated with caution. But anyway, the many barriers that have been talked about in terms of scale up of energy efficiency, prior experiences where there's lack of knowledge about the requirements of I suppose measurement, and so a lack of confidence in the savings that may actually be achieved from a project. There's a huge gap in this area globally, and this is the gap that EVO's involved in, where we basically see so many projects cannot accurately verify their impacts. And Alfredo also pointed to that quote from the US program, saying that basically most projects are unable to demonstrate their impact. That's not a good state of affairs, considering that, as we know, energy efficiency is one of the biggest potential solutions that we have in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and avoiding dangerous climate change. The reason that we don't see more attention on this, which has, energy efficiency has as much potential or more than the other potential solutions, including all the renewables put together. But the reason we don't see that is that there's this pervasive lack of confidence in the transactions, and this is a real issue that we have to try and address. And to bridge this gap, we need to look at how to de-risk investments and create the sort of skills that people need. So at EVO, we are looking at how we could bridge that gap. And one of the solutions that we see is in creating a new professional class to help people become qualified in this quite complicated area. We don't need additional protocols, we don't need additional standards. We actually have the IPMVP, which is worked on by a huge group of practitioners underneath EVO and really kept up to date, and all that material is available on our website. The issue is that we don't have the qualified personnel to be able to handle these issues on the ground. So one of the things that we've used to date and used in a very widespread way, and many of you on this call maybe have gone through this course, but the CMVP, Certified Measurement Verification Professional qualification, is something that EVO runs through its training partners. And the qualification comes from the US Association of Energy Engineers, who are the owners of that particular accreditation. And so we recognize that it's a US-based accreditation that doesn't necessarily translate to a recognized qualification in all the countries of the world. And it also doesn't cover the entire scope of what people need skills in. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but there is a need for an independent class of experts that can actually look at this baseline in question, can verify whether the proposed energy savings from a project are realistic, and can make a credible plan for managing measurement and verification both before and after the project. So rather than being sort of a broader qualification, understanding concepts and methodologies, which is what CMVP is, this is a more pragmatic need for a real class of practitioners that can actually start to implement projects. So we've created a new accreditation called the Certified Energy Savings Verifier, or CESV. And this is a training and certification program that we're now looking to roll out in many countries, given wherever there's demand and when we can put something together. We've had some training already in Indonesia and upcoming sessions as well for France and Canada, other markets where M&V professionals are active. So let's just talk a little bit about that. This slide actually recaps a little bit of what I've just been saying. This new accreditation actually helps to fill that gap, and it helps to, I think, look at how we can start to scale up. The important point on this particular slide here is the third point, about the scale up of valuation of projects, particularly by financiers. So bankers, investors, clean energy funds, energy efficiency certificate programs that governments may look to run. Those kinds of programs are very important to be able to demonstrate measurable impact and demonstrate actual savings. That underpins confidence to extend finance and investment, which is, we know, a real sticking point in terms of scaling up energy efficiency. So bringing that confidence in the transaction and helping that whole energy efficiency ecosystem to actually understand better what's being proposed from the side of project developers, and maybe what's being invested in from the side of investors. This is all underpinned by M&V and all underpinned by a genuine trust in a particular professional capability to be able to say, yes, this is credible M&V, this is credible measurement technique that we can rely upon. So the CESV is a high-grade certification, as the slide says, provided by a local certifying body. Very important because this allows a local accreditation to be done for local investors. I think something that local investors can relate to and can actually believe in, and it can be administered locally according to the conditions that are prevalent in that particular country. We see it as being something similar to accountants and people who provide services like that to companies, where not everybody in a particular company needs to be qualified in everything. You can actually just hire in an expert to help with that. There has been a lot of focus in the past on educating banks and investors on how to do this themselves, but that's a huge task, and it's a difficult task because it's not core business for them necessarily, despite the fact that many investors have an appetite for low carbon or green investment, if you like. So energy efficiency support people like CESVs who can actually provide an independent certification on projects is a sort of an important auxiliary service to getting finance developed. And so this is kind of why we think it's very important to develop this new professional class of people who can actually be M&V experts. So to be a CESV, there is a course that Evo owns and delivers at the moment. You have to pass an exam, really looking at these three components about whether baselines and pre-installed estimations of energy savings are correct according to the principles that Tom ran through, that you can actually say this is a credible baseline. You can then look at what the plan, at plans, actually doing plans. So actually creating, as Tom said again, M&V in advance of the project implementation. So you have a clear sense of what you'll be measuring, what the baseline will be, and that this complies with the generally accepted principles of IPMVP. And then also some sense that there's confidence that the measurement post installation will actually be able to be reconciled with the plan and will be a good representation of savings achieved. So this is really what CESV certification is all about, and this is why we think it's so important to create as an overall contribution to the energy efficiency scale up that we know is desperately needed on the investment side. So de-risking investments, increasing confidence, and becoming then a sort of consistent global solution for programs. In conclusion, and just maybe to sort of tie everything together before we go to the questions, I think we've tried to impress on you the point that M&V and measurement in particular is a key component for success of energy efficiency projects, and it brings the overall confidence behind the transaction that we need, particularly for investment. So it ensures that savings expected are going to be achieved, or if not, that there's some clear sense of what the savings will be. And this is a consistent methodology that's needed across the world. So we need to be able to say projects in one country can be understood and relied upon in terms of the information about their impact. And measured and comparable across other places. So Evo is perfectly placed to deliver that. Projects, as we've seen from Tom's example, in energy efficiency are complex, are difficult to get a handle on in this, and they do need particular skills in analysis and understanding what's really happening. There's a point there about cost. I think that's very important too, just to mention, and we can talk about it in the questions. Often cost of doing adequate monitoring and measurement verification is seen as restrictive. People say, oh, look, it's expensive, we don't want to do that. But we sort of think that it's a small cost compared to the savings that are generally on offer from these kinds of projects, often which are quite profitable. So it's an important amount that needs to be set aside generally. I think it depends, but between 2 and 5% of the project cost to be actually focused on this is actually very important to be able to demonstrate, overall savings. And CESV offers a scalable alternative to actually build capacity in countries that are looking to go further with this, particularly for investors and bankers, to make sure that savings are measured, make sure that impact is understood, and that hopefully leads to more confidence in future investment in energy efficiency. So that's all I wanted to say. My contact details are there, but I'd encourage you to go and have a look at the website listed at the bottom for EVO, where there's a whole lot more information about the importance of M&V and many examples of, I guess, how you can get involved. So thank you, Tom. Back to you for the
okay,
questions.
great. I'm going through the questions, and there's one specific that you covered. I may try to put a different spin on it and answer it. And the question is, what is the difference between CESV and CMVP? And as you pointed out, it really CMVP. And my spin on it is CMVP really tests the theory. It doesn't. CESV tests a person's ability to do an M&V plan. That's what it does. And it also does two things. So they actually have to do a plan. They do not in CMVP. It's a multiple choice question. It tests them on the theory of understanding M&V, but not on the application of it, not on the practice of it. CSV tests individuals on the practice of how they have to actually do an M&V plan in the course and to be certified. They also have to do an analysis of the energy audit, because they're going to certify that the savings estimate is reasonable. So there's two very different things from what CMVP is. It's a much more of a theoretical understanding and test as opposed to the CESV. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that. That's my take on the big differences.
No, that's fine. I mean, that's also what I was trying to say, that whilst CMVP is about methodologies and understanding the concepts, CSV is much more pragmatic and practical to what is really needed on a project, as well as being locally kind of applicable rather than an overseas or an international accreditation that maybe doesn't make sense in the local market. So yeah. Right.
So going down these questions, I don't know, Denny, it looks like you've done some sort of prioritizing of these. I see a couple that I could answer quickly, but I don't know if you want to. We're going to let Denny, who's the executive director of EVO, is going to go through some of these questions. If you have some thoughts on prioritization you've already done, do you want to do that, Denny, or do you have thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Well, maybe I can jump in here. And a philosophical question that always come back into energy efficiency presentation, but I think it might be interesting to get your views on that, the three of you. And it's the statement goes as follows: the biggest hindrance to energy efficiency is the distribution utility who's averse to energy savings by customer as it affects their bottom line. And so what are your thoughts on possible options to work with utilities to go around that problem? I know it's an open, it's a large question, but maybe in 30 seconds each, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can take that a little bit. Sorry, it's Mark jumping in here. It's quite right that I mentioned the word ecosystem as part of my talk, and I often think in terms of all the different actors who need to be pulling together to make energy efficiency investments work, and distribution utilities in the most part around the world are motivated by getting more electrons down more wires to more customers, and that's the sort of incentive model that they've been given. There are other examples though where there's been examples used around the world where you can have incentives for demand management for utilities like that, where certain amount of funds can be set aside, often through billing and sort of through regulation, that is dedicated for them to use as as for demand side activities. And if they're allocated on a sort of use it or lose it basis, that means that they actually won't receive those funds unless they spend on energy efficiency. That gives them an incentive to actually go ahead and pursue those energy savings projects, which actually are beneficial to the whole system. And it allows them, I guess, an incentive to do it. But it is difficult, and it is something that needs to be worked through.
Alfredo, do you have some thoughts on that?
Hi, yes. So, well, this question is it always comes up because the problem of distribution utilities, even if this distribution is a distribution department of a vertically integrated utility or is a separate corporation, the problem is that people working in distribution, people working in transmission, they don't see the system as a whole. So sometimes, particularly demand side response, demand side management, all those projects are helpful for the system. You're able to reduce your peak loads, you're able to balance the frequency, you're able to do a lot of things just by managing your demand. The issue is that when you're looking only at your small box of distribution or your small box of transmission, you don't see all those effects coming up, and you don't have the incentives to really work on them. This is becoming perhaps more important now because now utilities, distribution utilities, are starting to see or expecting a change of structure, a change of business. They're having on the one hand prosumers where they're generating power at the distribution level, but they're also having a lot of new loads. They are becoming very high at specific times, particularly e-mobility, electric cars and all these things. Not yet happening, but they're going to happen relatively soon in my view. And that is going to make distribution utility operators to think how they're handling that. That's one thing on the distribution utility side. But it's not only the biggest it's a hindrance, but there are many things that consumers, that companies can do without thinking what the distribution company does. There are many things in your processes as a consumer or as a manufacturer that you can do to save energy that is independent of the power utility. So it's important to consider all those aspects and how this affects your process or your income or your expenditures. So there are many things playing, and it's important to look at the system, but also to look from the different perspectives and understand that.
Thank you, Alfredo. Another question here, getting financing for energy efficiency project is a large challenge, but in fact, the rate of default for loans for these projects is quite low. Do you have any examples of proven approaches or mechanisms for debt financing of medium and large projects in commercial and industrial facilities? I know that's another open question.
Well, I mean, the answer is everybody's looking for that answer. There are no real proven models. We had one in ADB that went down in Exim Bank. We had a project-based lending scheme, but at the end of the day, a new CEO came in, decided they didn't want to do it. So I don't know of any that they're actually out there. There's some in North America. They've got these funds and SPVs that are doing projects. I don't know, Mark, if you know of any that have come up recently, and Alfredo, I'm not aware of any. That's the big gap in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably worth mentioning just for this audience, Tom, as Alfredo said, just the performance contracting model in general, which is a model for I suppose rolling these things out, but it is difficult to do en masse rather than sort of project by project. We're talking about larger debt financing facilities.
Getting banks involved. Yeah, trying to get banks involved on loans to ESCOs is just a non-starter. It's tough.
Yeah. So there's a whole lot of difficulties around that, although the concept is sound. The other thing that happens with facilities like that, if there's a public facility, for example, like a revolving fund, which has been tried in many places, including in Thailand, the fund in Thailand, and I think in Mongolia they've done that, and in other places like China, but the issue with that is also the sort of the churn in terms of the work that's required to actually administer those funds, so that things get bogged down, and sometimes they don't necessarily don't necessarily get the funds out quickly enough because they're sort of, it's difficult. They still have to go through the process of assessing each project and getting comfortable. So yeah, so it is something that we need to still keep trying to crack.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any right now. I don't know, Alfredo, are you aware of any that where there's really a robust or an example of a proven bank lending type program? I mean, there's some, but they typically have guarantee schemes behind them. Alfredo, are you aware of any? May not be.
Sorry, I just have to disconnect. My thing got frozen, then I couldn't actually press the mic. Sorry. Yeah. So, well, EPC contracts work relatively well as long as the financier understands well how the savings happen and when are they happening and how they're happening in which amount, in order for them to build their models. It's not really rocket science as long as you have the right amounts in place, and that's the issue of verification and monitoring. Obviously, and I want to bring a little bit of perspective of AB as a financier. We are working with, I mean, we had some issues in the past trying to finance energy efficiency interventions. Our big infrastructure loans were not really well adapted to our energy efficiency. We had to go through a state-owned ESCOs created specifically or almost specifically for that project. The beginning of those were in China. We also work through financial intermediaries, which is perhaps the most effective way. Now we have a new tool called results-based lending, where we work through country systems at the state level to channel funding. On the commercial side, is a matter of convincing the bank, and in order to structure that loan or to structure that financing based on how you're going to generate savings, and not only putting a meter at the beginning, at the end, and then have a baseline, but also how that is going to affect the production or the system of the client, and how that is going to be playing out of the overall project. So, you know, EPCs work well, but there are plenty of homework to be done before that.
Okay, yeah. So we've got about 13 minutes left, and I don't know, Danny, if you've gone through. I see some that are really quick answers we can provide. Shall I go through those real quickly and we can get them off the list and get many of them, or did you see one or two you thought would be really good?
Well, there are a lot, so we will follow up individually, but we won't have time. But maybe if you can address the issue of the rated baseline.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. The answer is a rated baseline is not IPMVP compliant unless it's measured. You know what I'm saying? If it's just a rated, then it's not measured. The core of IPMVP is it has to be measured before and after. So the rated baseline that I had, which was just in my example, which was just the wattage on the light, is not IPMVP compliant. When you measure it, it becomes, but then it's not a rated baseline anymore.
Okay, great. Just on the CMVP and CESV issue, maybe I can offer a 1-minute illustration, because there are a lot of questions on CMVPs and CESV. I think the best way to look at it is to look at CMVPs as the musicians in an orchestra. And as such, they have a very important role to play, but they might be specialists in all kinds of things. And the CESV is the maestro in the orchestra and has a global view of the score, and he's directing the musicians. So that might be one way to look at it. It's complementary to the theoretical knowledge, and it's more practical, but it's really the biggest difference I see is the CESV is really like the maestro in the orchestra and oversees everything, or can oversee everything, and can direct the professionals to provide input into an MNV process.
Okay. Good. By the way, there's one here. It says to Mr. Dreesen, any thoughts on EESL's India's approach of using deemed savings? So I'm thinking somebody's trying to set me up on that one, right?
Well, there was another question on that, and it was more a comment. And well, it was asking Mark, who answered, "Why are you so diplomatic about deemed savings?"
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I mean, for those of you that know me, I mean, I'm usually in the audience not saying so nice things about the ESL model, but I mean, but I'm going to not do that. I think their deemed savings approach, they say they are doing measurements before and after, but at the end of the day, deemed savings is only reliable if you do the measurement before and after. It's just that, and then maybe you stipulate the savings, but it would have to be deemed based on a before and after measurement to be IPMVP compliant. That's my take on it. I don't know if you have a different view of it, Mark, or anybody else. Kenny?
No, I think I tried to speak about that
Yeah.
on the way through, and it's really about the centrality of measurement,
That's
right?
right.
And
That's right. But deemed savings by itself implies it's deemed, it's not measured, so it's really not compliant with IPMVP. And while it might be somewhat accurate, there's no way to know. It's not reliable. You can't rely on it as a basis for reflecting.
Yeah, and you know, I think there's some explanatory power of deemed savings to sort of give you an indication of what might happen, but there's something, I guess Evo takes issue with the fact that deemed savings is referred to as an M&V
it's not
sort of methodology, but by definition there's no measurement, so it's at best a V, but it doesn't actually verify anything either. So in fact it's just a bit of a sort of an estimation rather than an M&V method.
With some form of knowledge, right? It's not without knowledge. It has some basis for it, but it would be similar to just taking it'd be like taking the rated lighting savings. You know what I'm saying? In my example, without measuring before and after.
As I said on the way through, there is a purpose for it, and it's not completely, you know, no, it can be quite helpful to give you some indication of where things are headed, but it's not M&V.
Yep. There was a route. Go ahead, Danny. We only got about. Go ahead.
Yeah, 5 minutes. There's an interesting question here that it's how do you measure and verify the efficiency achieved in street lighting projects if the state government or project owner also want to install new lighting along with the retrofitting project?
That's easy. Yeah. Well, you want me to answer that? I'm sorry, are you finished?
Yeah, sure.
That's easy.
Sure,
that's a common requirement in all street lighting. When you do a street lighting project, the motivation for almost all mayors, governors, or whatever for doing a street lighting project is to put in new lighting. That's their way of demonstrating to their voters that they've done something. They can push and say, look, I provided more lit streets, because that's a positive, because that is reduced crime, you know, and all these other benefits by having more light. So what you do is, I mean, you don't really measure and verify the savings, but what we do is I bundle them. You bundle the energy efficiency ones, the retrofits, with the new ones, and you can have the savings from the retrofits subsidized, pay for a portion of the others, but it can't be paid from savings. In other words, you bundle the two together and you can understand what the savings are, but at the end of the day, obviously you're going to increase the electric bill from what it was before with new lighting. And I'm not sure, I mean, it's almost always a requirement with street lighting. And so what was the target of the question? Was it M&V? How do you do it? Is that what it was? How do you measure it?
It was not specified.
Yeah, I mean, so you do measure when you install it. You measure the lights when they're installed. You do, but you have no baseline because it never existed, right? But you do want to measure what each one is on the watt level, and you do on a statistical sample basis. You obviously do not do all of them. No way. You don't measure 16,000 lamps in my example. You might do 1,000 or something on whatever the statistical validity basis is.
I just saw another one.
I saw one about EE motors. Oh no, go ahead. Yeah. Go
ahead. No, that was one. That was one that I had as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to. I'll just quickly. I tried for 2 years to set up an ESCO in Philippines under motors, and at the end of the day, couldn't do it because we couldn't come up with a M&V method that the client would accept for motors. It's quite challenging to do because you have to basically create a baseline for every load level. In other words, a motor drives a fan, it drives a pump. So depending on what the load draw is from that pump or fan, the motor is going to have a different energy consumption. So you can't take a nameplate, and this was shocking to me. So doing M&V on motors almost has to be done under option B. You have to have ongoing monitoring and verification and monitoring of it to make it work. And that becomes kind of cost prohibitive. I saw recently a software that's claiming to be able to do that. So challenge.
Just before I forget, there were a lot of questions on whether the webinar will be shared. Yes, you should receive an email in the following days after the webinar with the access to the slides as well. So that answers a lot of questions.
Denis,
Yeah.
I'm going through the list of questions at the moment as well, and I'm conscious we only have a few minutes left. I notice a lot of questions just sort of clarifying on CESV. So I just quickly respond to that. There was a few sort of saying, why would we have CESV when CMVP is already very widespread? Another good question saying, if you're a certified energy auditor and a CMVP, is that an equivalent with CESV? You know, and other things about CESV and how it would actually apply. Look, I just want to say to everyone on behalf of EVO, I mean, we are aware that whilst IPMVP and the CMVP qualification is already out there among practitioners and it's widespread, we need to do a better job of getting these things to market, getting these to people who are not necessarily engaged yet, and we see the CESV as a practical step towards achieving that. So if you're already a accredited or certified energy auditor and you've also got CMVP, then you're well on the way to understanding what it is that we're trying to do, which is to get a stronger level of confidence in both projects being developed and then the savings that will emanate from those projects. And in doing that in a way that actually is clear for people and can be more readily taken up. That's the whole purpose of EVO, to get this into wider currency and get this more widespread, so we can get more projects done in energy efficiency. So, you know, I think we, as we develop CESV, we're looking for input from others as well. So I'd encourage any of you to get involved with EVO and to sort of take more of a look at what we're doing and make questions there as well. So I just wanted to say that on behalf of EVO before the finish.
Yeah, I might add just quickly, I mean, because we did the Indonesia one. We have 13 CESVs here in Indonesia, and a critical first step is to if you're a CMVP and a certified energy auditor, that allows you to not have to take a lot of the training courses. You can almost go right to the exam. But again, the difference is you're being tested on your capability to estimate the savings of an investment grade audit and to develop an M&V plan. That's the difference. Yeah, it's like a practice. You have to really demonstrate that you have that competency. So that's the difference. But those are really good precursors, and they can significantly reduce what you have to do to become a CESV. Okay. So I did see one other one, and I don't know, did you see it, Alfredo? There was one for you they wanted you to talk a little bit more about the energy intensity graph. I don't know if we probably don't have time with 3 minutes on that. I don't know if you can order a couple. I don't know what the question is. It was a very general question. Did you see it?
Yeah, I saw it. And also I saw another question from a colleague in North Africa asking about what can governments do to support energy efficiency. So I want to address these two very quickly. The energy intensity graph basically describes the energy intensity measured as total primary energy, the TPES, divided by GDP in dollars. And it's an aggregate number, and it's an indirect number. Countries can see changing their energy intensity, not because they're becoming more energy efficient, but because they're changing the way they use energy. For example, an industrial-based economy will use energy more intensively than a service economy, where they're basically running computers, for example, but they produce more dollars with that energy consumed. That's how energy intensity varies, and that's not energy efficiency. The graph plots 32 developing member countries that where ADB is working, and shows how they've been changing since year 2000 to year 2015. And it shows that there has not been a huge decrease among the whole group, or a consolidation towards a lower end. So it shows that there is plenty of things to do. But again, that's an indirect measure. It's not very accurate. However, the SDG number 7 measures intensity, doesn't measure energy efficiency.
Okay, great.
And then regarding the question on the North African countries, essentially applies to all countries where there are not many initiatives, and those initiatives with ESCOs tend to fail because there's not really funding from government. And what can be done? Well, there have been a number of experiences. The governments, in order to support energy efficiency, have to do mainly two things. One is to build policy frameworks, regulatory framework, where energy efficiency is promoted and is incentivized. The other thing that they can do is to channel concessional funding from development partners like ADB, for example, where we can lend very cheaply to governments, a G2G loan, and then they can channel it through a public ESCO or through a public state bank and channel it to the market at a much lower rates. What they can also do is to provide partial guarantees or first loss guarantees to some projects where the government or the state will be able to take out some of that risk in the project, essentially de-risking and reducing the exposure, so attracting investments. So there are different channels that the governments can help. Development partners like ADB, the World Bank, are trying to promote these kind of tools and trying to get strongly, perhaps, in the energy efficiency aspects of the energy sector in different countries, but not so strongly as it should, in my view. And then perhaps there is not such demand as well from the governments. I think has to do with awareness. It has to do with how the energy sector operates, who are the main players, whether the vertically integrated utility is very powerful, more powerful than the ministry, so dictate policy. There are many things happening, and there is no easy answer. Each country is very different.
No, yeah. Thank you, Alfredo. It's 8:31. We're 1 minute past. I guess just a little bit of housekeeping. Denny, are you still on, Denny?
Yes, I am.
Are we going to be able, so we can, well, how can we can maybe answer these questions? Do we have access to emails to send the answers to these questions that we did not get to? We can probably provide answers.
Yes, we do have a full log of who asked the question with emails, and
okay. So we'll do our best to get that done. Okay. Our apologies to those who asked questions and we did not get to them, and really want to thank Alfredo and Mark and Ivo for supporting this, Monica in particular, and of course Denny for supporting us. This is really a great session, and hopefully we'll return to the live ones next year. I don't know if that we'll ever get back to that, right? We don't know, the live presentations. So with that, I say thank you. Does anybody else have any real quick remarks you want to say in closing?
Just thank you, Tom, for organizing. Thanks, Alfredo, for the ADB perspective also, and to Denis and Monica for sort of facilitating today. And just to the audience that's remaining, anyone who would like to know more about EVO or to get more involved with the sorts of courses that we're running, please do get in touch.
Okay, well, thank everybody. Really appreciate everybody staying up so late. Go ahead, Alfredo.
I also want to say thank you guys for putting this together. Has been a very interesting session. Really enjoyed it. Great questions, great information, and hopefully we are able to push energy efficiency one step forward through these small events. Thanks all for participating at this time, particularly in the evening in Southeast Asia, and good luck.
Yep. Everybody stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.